Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome everyone for joining our webinar today entitled High-throughput label-free quant high-res DIA workflow on Orbitrap Exploris 240 mass spectrometer. My name is Maciej Bromirski, and I'm the Senior Product Manager for the hybrid instruments at Thermo Scientific. It is with great pleasure to introduce to you the main speaker of today's presentation, Dr. Santosh Renunius. Dr. Renunius obtained his PhD degree from the Institute of Bioinformatics in Bangalore, India. During his PhD, he was trained at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in applying high-resolution mass spectrometry technologies to characterize breast cancer and identify novel therapeutic drugs. He has been engaged in several cancer biomarker discovery projects as well as targeted assay development as a part of the Cancer Proteome Tumor Analysis Consortium at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Renunius joined Mayo Clinic as an assistant professor, where he significantly contributed to the development of MS-based assay for diagnosis of SARS-CoV-2 antigen in clinical samples, along several other clinical assay development projects. Dr. Renunius has recently joined Thermo Scientific to support and develop new applications workflows for qualitative and quantitative proteomics using high-end Orbitrap instrumentation. Before we continue with the webinar, I'd like to emphasize that we value your feedback, so please complete our short survey. I also like to comment that each of the console elements are movable and resizable, and do submit your questions in the Ask a Question widget on your webinar console. And finally, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you within 24 hours. Thank you. Santosh, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Maciej. Hello everyone, my name is Santosh Renunius, and today I'll be talking about high-throughput HR-DIA workflow on Exploris 240 mass spectrometer. So the question here we want to address is why to quantify proteins. Beyond protein IDs, here the focus is on adding confident quantitative information which would give meaningful insights into the biological systems. This applies to several different fields of applications within proteomics, be it functional, translational, biomarker discovery, or single-cell proteomics. In order to confidently characterize these biological systems, one would require confident and accurate quantitative information. This in turn would lead to statistically significant results for hypothesis testing in a particular biological system of interest. In addition to highly precise and accurate quantitation, high sample numbers are still required to ensure statistical relevance of the results, considering the high biological variance. Various fit-for-purpose quantitative methods have been proposed. Depending upon the goal, one can choose high accurate and high precision target methods such as single reaction monitoring (SRM), multiple reaction monitoring (MRM), or parallel reaction monitoring (PRM). Multiplexing methods such as tandem mass tags (TMT) has high precision but lack accuracy, whereas DDA and DIA methods lack precision but are highly accurate. One can then use any of these methods based on sample size. For large clinical cohort studies, DIA has really emerged as method of choice considering the trade-off between accuracy and precision. Now the question is, why use data independent acquisition for large-scale proteomic studies? Basically, most of the clinical studies include analysis of large sample cohorts and requires confident and reproducible identification as well as quantitation of as many proteins as possible. At the same time, keeping missing data points as minimum as possible. In general, DDA methods include stochastic triggering of precursors for MSMS resulting in variable duty cycle times and variable data points across each precursor. Targeted methods such as PRM are highly accurate but precise and lacks the depth in terms of number of quantified proteins. On the other hand, typical DIA methods include wide window isolation of precursors across a defined mass range resulting in a uniform data points across all the precursors for highly accurate quantitation. The overall result is less missing values as compared to DDA methods. Let's dive a little bit into principles of data independent acquisition. DIA. DIA scans include wide window isolation and fragmentation of precursors under equal conditions. The schematic here shows the precursor scan from M by Z 400 to M by Z 1000, followed by 25 DIA scans with the isolation window of 24 M by Z and overlap of 1 M by Z between each successive scan. For optimum results, several important acquisition parameters need to be optimized. These include isolation width, mass range, resolution, overlap between successive isolation windows, and collision energy. Out of these parameters, isolation width, mass range, and resolution have an impact on analysis speed, identification depth, and quantitation accuracy. Let's look how each of these three parameters impact the protein IDs, quantitation, and throughput. High resolution leads to higher quantitation accuracy and precision, while higher isolation windows increase analysis throughput. At the same time, mass range has an impact on overall identification. Therefore, a fine balance between protein IDs, quantitation accuracy, and throughput is utmost important. Here is a graphical schematic of HR-DIA workflow setup for label-free quantitation. The main goal of the setup is the quantitative performance at high sample throughput while delivering robust and reproducible results to make it a perfect fit for large-scale clinical and biomarker discovery studies. The setup consists of Vanquish Neo UHPLC system, micropillar array column, easy spray ion source, Orbitrap Exploris 240 mass spectrometer, and Spectronaut from Biognosys as a data analysis software. We have also shown results from DIA, an open source software for DI data analysis. So overall, we focus on achieving a balance between quantitation, sample throughput, and identification. Two different sample sets were used for assessing quantitative performance of the workflow. The two proteomics contains a high human background of 800 nanogram HeLa peptide digest and a low to medium amounts of spiked in E. coli peptide digest in the ratios of 1:2:4:8. The three proteomics contains a medium human background of 325 nanogram HeLa peptide digest and yeast and E. coli peptide digests in the ratios of 1:0.5 and 1:4 respectively. The mixtures have been chosen because they closely mimic biological samples with up and down regulated protein expression. The data was processed using Spectronaut 16 with direct DI library-free approach. Let's take a closer look at a microPAC HPLC column. They are also known as micropillar array columns, a silicon-based low-flow chromatographic column which provides perfect order within the column. The top image here shows a packed bed column, the format we all are familiar with. While they do generate great results, they do have a drawback, and that is less predictable flow path for our analytes. This can cause some dispersion during the separation and broader peaks. On the other hand, the microPAC column separation bed is manufactured by etching interstitial volumes from solid silicon vapor, leaving an array of perfectly ordered pillars. This eliminates peak dispersion, creating much higher plate counts and sharper peaks. The overall result is unrivaled robustness and reliability, offering substantial savings. Defined DDA QC experiments have been intermittently run throughout the whole experiment series. Protein and peptide IDs were obtained using primary search in Proteome Discoverer software suite. The identifications could be maintained over a time period of 2 months, including idle times with a net measuring time of around 500 hours. Here we found that the identification range was within 10% even when using different QC sample batches. It shows the robustness of the workflow setup described here, which is required for analysis of large sample cohorts. So in the beginning, we started to optimize the LC gradients for this new micropack Neo column. So we wanted to identify the optimal conditions in order to get evenly distributed peptide IDs throughout the runtime. So we started with the gradient on top here, gradient version 1, which is a blue line. And you can see that the gradient started eluting pretty late. We then moved to the next version, gradient version 2, where it was a steep gradient, and we can still see that there is a slight early elution and the late peptides are not coming there. In the third version, we basically started with the higher flow rate at the beginning of the run in order to get early elution and still maintaining the overall evenly distributed peptide elution throughout the run. So on the right hand panel here, you can see that there is a evenly distributed peptide spectrum matches identifications over the run. You can see more IDs at the 8, which is always happens because of the column wash. So overall, we could optimize the method for 35-minute method for this particular workflow setup. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, mass range is critical for determining the quantitative accuracy and high throughputness of the method. So here, in order to identify the optimum mass range, we acquired DDA analysis of 3 protein mixes in a 120-minute method. The mass range chosen was 350 to 1200 MB. The data was analyzed using Primaris algorithm. A total of 200,000 peptides were identified in 3 replicates. So this identified peptides were been in MB of 50 from 350 MB to 1200 MB. And as you can see, most of the peptides fall within the mass range of 400 to 900 MB, almost 90% of them. So this is very important factor in order to have an optimum mass range for our DIA method. Here are the brief details of MS method and LC gradient. Direct injection setup was used on Vanquish Neo UHPLC system. We use flow rate of 350 nanoliter per minute, which is a bit higher than usual flow rate of 250 to 300 nanoliter per minute. A 30-minute optimized gradient was used on micropack Neo column. Overall runtime was 39 minutes. DIA method was used as follows: MS1 resolution of 60,000 resolution, MS1 AGC target of 300%, which is 3 million ions collected in Orbitrap. MS2 DIA resolution was 15K. MS1 mass range was used as 400 to 900 MB. Isolation width of 12 MB. DIA scan range was used as 140 to 1450 MB. MS2 AGC target was used as 800%, which is 800,000 ions collected in Orbitrap for detection. SCD normalized collision energy was used as 30%. In order to assess the missing value concern, we analyzed one protein sample of HeLa digest in triplicates using a DIA method as described on a 30-minute gradient. Data was analyzed using Spectrometer spectrometer software. In the direct DIA approach, we identified more than 38,000 peptides with low missing values across different replicates. On the other hand, library-based approach identified more than 65,000 peptides, but data completeness for additional IDs was not optimal, which could lead to higher number of missing values in large cohort studies. We would like to have as low as missing values possible across different replicates and different sample sets. So we'd like to point out that the disclaimer here is that for highly confident results, library runs should be ideally have the same gradient as the experiment runs, gaining deep coverage by using fractionated samples. Using a large library with limited retention time consistency may lead to low precision and false positives. Library building therefore has a high time penalty when many different experiment conditions exist. Overall, the direct DIA approach described here addresses the missing value concern. Using the HR-DIA workflow as described earlier, we analyze single proteome and proteome mixers using Spectrometer 17 as well as DIA software. In the single proteome sample, we identified 5,732 proteins using spectrometer 17 and 59,574 peptides, whereas DIA identified 5,094 proteins and 44,153 peptides. This shows that the spectrometer 17 outperformed DIA for a single proteome sample mixtures. In the two proteome sample mixture, spectrometer 17 identified 6,226 proteins and overall 85,612 peptides from both human and E. coli, whereas DIA identified 5,934 peptides and 65,793 peptides from two proteome sample mixtures. This all indicates that the spectrometer 17 outperforms DIA in the library-free data analysis if the same quality data criteria was applied. Here, we wanted to compare the direct DIA versus the library-based approach. First, we compare the direct DIA performance of spectrometer 17 as compared to spectrometer 16, which has clear advantage over the previous released. When you compare the direct DIA approach versus library-based approach has identified more than 20% precursors and more than 10% protein groups, which is expected. Additional coverage in the library-based approach can be obtained by using a suitable library generated from fractionated samples under same conditions. In this slide, I am showing the observed protein ratios for E. coli proteins spikes into HeLa digest. The dash orange line indicates theoretical log-to ratios which are at 3, 2, and 1. As you can clearly see, the observed ratios are pretty close to the expected ratios with very close spreads. The outliers are very few. The right-hand panel shows observed coefficient of variation of peptide ratio measurements across different ratios. The percent CB was observed to be less than 7%. Having low CB values is one of the important factors in accurate and precise quantitation. Here I am showing the spread of differentially expressed human and E. coli proteins in a two proteome samples experiments. So the proteins involved in various cell regulatory activities were identified here. Multiple proteins involved in bacterial transcription translation were identified from bacteria. Then there were human interference proteins involved in antiviral lipids were also identified. On the far right-hand side, we have identified lowest abundant E. coli proteins. So in order to characterize how our method performed for the quantitation of the lowest abundant proteins, we chose 10 lowest abundant expressed proteins in E. coli and see whether we have detected them or not. So on the right-hand panel here, we have shown the expression of 10 lowest abundant expressed proteins. We identified 7 out of these 10 proteins, and also we have basically achieved the expected quantitation for these proteins in our experiments. So most of the places, as you can see, the green bar is very close to the expected ratio of the dash orange line. So overall, our method was capable of detecting and quantifying accurately the lowest abundant expressed proteins. This slide shows the data pertaining from the 3 sample protein mixes. The left-hand panel shows the expression of yeast, human, and E. coli proteins and their differentially expressed proteins in the form of average log-to fold changes. So the dash orange line indicates the theoretical ratios that's supposed to be 1, 0, and 2 in these cases. So what we have observed is the observed ratios in our experiments were very close to the theoretical ratios with very tightly spread points indicating high precision. On the right hand side, we are showing the correlation of 2 different sample sets analyzed and how well they are separated from each other. As you can clearly see, the human, yeast, and E. coli proteins were quite well separated from each other based on their abundances. as observed in our study. These particular sample sets, 3 proteome sample sets, are actually used as an LF-Q benchmark in most of the label-free quantitation studies. In this case, we have basically achieved pretty high accuracy and high quantitative proteome data. The high-resolution DIA workflow for label-free quantitation set up on an Orbitrap Exploris 240 mass spectrometer coupled to Vanquish Neo UHPLC system running with a mPAC Neo UHPLC column was shown to fulfill 3 criteria for the quantitation that we are describing here. We got excellent quantitation accuracy and precision for small amounts of bacterial and fungal proteins from challenging sample matrices. We got sample throughput and quality of the obtained data while achieving high proteome coverage. On the other hand, we got long-term stability and reproducibility of whole workflow, which was demonstrated by excellent performance and stability over a period of 2 months. So overall, we achieved the robust, reproducible, consistent results for our data. These combined capabilities make our workflow suitable for application in large cohort studies. So in conclusion, the combination of Vanquish Neo, mPAC Neo column and Orbitrap Exploris 240 mass spectrometer represents an ideal workflow for high-throughput label-free Proteome ID and quantitation by DIA method. A 39-minute method described here was developed with 30-minute gradient, providing a throughput of 36 samples per day. Direct DIA provides deep proteome coverage with more than 91% data completeness. DIA data is of high quality, leading to excellent quantitation results as demonstrated with mixed proteome experiments, where median CVs of quantified peptides were below 7% and high ratio accuracy were obtained. This concludes my presentation today, and thank you all for your attention. I can take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Santosh, for this very insightful presentation. Of course, we have now time to take some of the questions that you have. Just a reminder that if you haven't submitted your questions, please do so in the Ask a Question widget located on your webinar console. And now I'd like to highlight a couple of reminders. First, we value your feedback, so please complete our short survey. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to you within 24 hours, and that resources are downloadable from the related content widget on your console. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. We do appreciate your time and engagement. And of course, I'd like to thank Santosh for presenting the slides. Once again, thank you and have a nice day. Everyone, so now we're going to take the questions that are coming in the chat box. Let's start with the first one. What's the data per point? The data meaning, I guess, do you have enough data points to quantify each peptide and precursor? And actually, the same question from the same person is asked on the slides 16 and 18. Do we have an estimate on how many peptide proteins fell into the 30% of the Quan ratio, namely log 2 value between 0.7 to 1.3? Maybe the best person to answer that would be Julia.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you for the questions. So the data points per peak here, as Spectronaut gives them as an output, was 3 data points per peak, which is below what we usually have, but obviously the quantities were still very well determined for all the different runs. So I guess that's working quite nicely in the newer versions of Spectronaut now. And the second question I actually have to get a minute to think about fast.
Okay, Julia. So why don't we start with a, continue with a different question, and then you can come back to it, okay? Let me see here, scrolling down. Maybe this one is for you, Santosh. What is your recommendation for DIA workflow setup for small sample sets, maybe around 30 to 50 samples?
Hi. So this is a very important question, because in DIA studies, the sample sets always determine how long you want to run, and also the availability of the mass spectrometer system that you might have. So for depending on that, I think you could run, as described in this study, 30-minute or 35-minute runs to get this analysis done as a 36 samples per day. So you could do it in one day. But if you have a more mass spectrometry time available, then you could do long runs. Like on this column, we could do up to 90 to 120-minute runs to get even better depth. Yeah, that's what I recommend.
Okay, thank you. While I have you on the line, maybe you can take the next question as well. Regarding a UPAC column, what is the loading capacity of the UPAC 50 centimeter column used in your DIA workflow? And also, do these columns have any carryover issues?
Again, very important issue in terms of chromatography. So we have been using this microPAC centimeter columns for a while now, and the loading capacity per se, you can load up to 1 microgram of peptide digest. Although you could see best performance at about 500 nanogram that way. And the very important thing about these columns is that there's hardly any carryover. We have been tested multiple times to run complex digest and see in the next run, in the next blank run, how much carryover we see. Usually you do not see any carryover for this column. So it's also very important for large-scale DIA studies to run the samples without any blanks in between, as these columns do not have any carryover issue.
Okay, great. Another question maybe you can answer. We have an Orbitrap Exploris 480 system in the lab. Is it possible to port the method described here on our system? Again,
very important questions, because the 240 was launched recently as compared to Exploris 480, so most people would have Exploris 480 system in their labs. So it is easily possible to import the method from Exploris 240 to Exploris 480. There is no issue in that.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's give Santosh a break now and come back to Julia. Julia, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so I don't know if I exactly get the question, so please feel free to add if I'm not answering this now. But so the main number of proteins that is falling in the interquartile range 1.5 is for, at least for the 3 proteome mix, it's for the yeast is almost 2,000 proteins. For the human, it's 2,400 proteins, and for E. coli, it's a little more than 400 proteins. So these are falling in between these 1.5 interquartile ranges. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's at least giving you an idea about the outliers here in these plots. For the 2 proteome mixture, I don't have that at hand, I have to say. And please feel free to add to your question if you want some more information.
We can always follow through with this question and return to it. Okay, great. I don't see any questions coming. New questions coming. Yeah, so I think that there are no more questions. I'd like to thank everyone again for joining today's webinar. It's always a great pleasure to have everyone on the line and showing you our new work. And of course, like big thank to Santosh for presenting this slide, and Julia who joined the Q&A session. live from Bremen. She actually did the majority of the work in the lab, so great appreciation to both of the speakers. And again, thank you for joining today, and have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.